the managing editor, Ryan Finkelstein's Christmas. Let's talk about the New York Mets on the Just Baseball show. But before we actually start talking, I do want to read the text that you sent to Aram and I earlier today, if I can find it. Here we go. You said, hey guys, just offering my services to talk about Steve Cohen's fuck everyone else spending offseason on the JV show this week. And I thought that was perfect. I mean, you are a South Florida guy, but grew up a diehard Mets fan. You're the host of Locked On Mets. You are, as I called you in the intro that you haven't heard yet, like the go-to for Mets content, like the source for Mets content. And this is probably the best time to be a Mets fan. Obviously, you've got 86 and, the Doc Good and Darryl Strawberry stuff, but in your lifetime, nothing probably comes close to what's going on right now, no?
The only time that I could think of is like 06. Like 06 was a good year, but you have years like 06, 2015. There's a couple of years. There's never been a time where I could look out to the future for the Mets and be like, yeah, this team's going to win and it's going to keep winning because Steve Cohen wants to win. And it's just that simple. I am just to go from the feeling of DeGrom leaving. That's a feeling I know as a Mets fan. Like, another guy goes, you get Verlander, like, okay, DeGrom, who you're already kind of feeling like that.
Yeah.
And then you get the feel good of a Brandon Nimmo coming back.
Yeah.
Like, as a fan, you love the homegrown guy getting the contract. So that's good. And then you get Senga on a steal of a deal. Yeah, there's no comparison to what this offseason has been so far. And like my text said, this is Steve Cohen's fuck you to everyone in the league. He played a little bit nice last year. He started to spend a little bit, but this is where he says, you know what? And you know what? He telegraphed this. He said multiple times, if you're going to blow past the luxury tax for a year, blow all the way past it. And that's what they've done.
So
he wasn't going to go over by 2 million.
No. What's he over by 90?
I mean, it depends on which threshold. If you're talking about the Steve Cohen threshold, he's like, I think 40, 50 million over that one already. I think they're sitting at what, 340? I don't even know because they don't even have the arbitration locked in yet. So it's insane. What's the real luxury tax? Was it 230?
I think it was right around 225 this year. So I'm not sure if it's locked in this year, but they will pay it.
They'll pay it, and I would assume that they are clear of $100 million more than the first luxury tax line. Dude, which is just nuts.
It's absolutely insane. I'm going to ask you a really loaded question, and I'm going to ask you to remove your Mets fandom in a moment. But
yeah,
before that, obviously, shit's got to shake out the way that Mets fans want it to on the field. But you mentioned 2006. You mentioned like any positive memory for Mets fans, I'm sure, has a correlation to what's happening on the field. Now, it's not what's happening on the field. And I think that is actually a pretty telling shift in baseball fans' thinking, because baseball, I think, has turned from what's going on the field to what's happening off the field to impact what's going on the field, right? That's the conversation that we have. How much play do front offices have? And obviously we're talking about the owner right now. So Steve Cohen is not, hands-on with hiring the coordinator for minor league pitching, but Billy Epler is obviously doing a great job. Aram and I just hit on that a little bit in the intro. How confident is the Mets base, because you have your finger on the pulse of the Mets fan base better than anybody I know and I've come across. How confident is the Mets fan base that this will turn into, barring catastrophe, really, really positive on-field success?
I think if you're asking what the fan base is thinking, then I would say that it's hard to actually look at the Mets fan base and expect them to be rational, because look, it's every fan base, but the emotions get in there. And we have listeners on my show that are commenting now, and they're saying, look, this team isn't improved from last year, and that's a big problem. I believe they're improved. But even if you're telling me that they've gotten bare minimum where they were last year, which I think without a doubt they are at least as good as they were, it was a 101-win baseball team. What are we talking about here? Yeah. Like, yes, the season didn't end the way you want it to, but it was still a 101-win team. So personally, I think there's two ways to look at it. How do the fans feel about the Mets? Until the Mets win a World Series, get the monkey off their back and are consistently winning, there's always going to be that pessimism, that angst. But if we're going to talk about the future of the franchise, I think that they're in really good hands right now. I think they're in a good place to win in the short term on a bloated payroll and become sustainable in a few years.
And let's be honest, you know it better than anybody. So much of Mets fans' personality is that they are long-suffering Mets fans, right? Pessimism is the name of the game in the Mets fan base. So I understand that there's going to be this eternal pessimism in the New York Mets fan base, but I think now is the time to shed all of that. But now comes the loaded question for you. And I asked Aram this. He gave a unique response. I was asked this, like the genesis of this was I was a guest on the Future Sox podcast on Sunday morning, and they kind of asked me this question. I was like, holy shit, that's a good question. All I want to do right now is ask Fink. So I'm stealing it from them, but really simply, and try to take off your Mets hat, right? Try to imagine yourself as a pedestrian baseball fan living in, I don't know, LA, San Francisco, something like that. Is what Steve Cohen is doing good for baseball? It's hard. He's thinking. This isn't dead air. He's thinking.
Yes, I'm thinking. It's a tough question. I think that, it's good for baseball in the sense that, it's forcing action, right? It's forcing other teams to really think about, maybe we have to spend a little more to compete. And I think in some ways, I always skew on the side of the players getting more money is good for the game, right? With that said, I also can't ignore the fact that when I was a Mets fan growing up and the Yankees were doing what the Mets are doing right now, I hated it. So I get why a White Sox podcast or any other, fan base that maybe saw Kodai Senga out there and thought that's the one guy we want to add. That's the one. We're not trying to add anyone else. We're just trying to add Kodai Senga. And the Mets got him too. And they're thinking, well, now there's just not enough to go around for everybody. So I think the only way we can really tell is to see how this season plays out and to see how baseball continues to transform, because with the way the Padres and the Mets are spending, but then you also have other teams that might be looking at what the Phillies did and are just going to be like, well, we're never going to compete with them, so let's just get into the dance and try to get lucky in October. So it's so hard. I know it's a bad answer. I'm all over the place because it's a really tough question.
No shit, man. I was all over the place too. Aram had a multifaceted approach too. Like there's no clear cut yes or no answer to that question. So I was very fascinated coming from a Mets person if they could remove themselves and give me an honest answer. And you just gave me a very honest answer. And it's a complex answer because it's a really complex question put in simple terms. So no, I think that's perfect. I want to work in reverse chronological order for signings, because I want to go Senga, then Robertson, then Nimmo, then Verlander, because those are the four big ones for the New York Mets so far. So starting with Kodai Senga, this was a massive one. And what this told me was that the tandem of Billy Epler and Steve Cohen ID'd a guy. And, I don't know how baseball savvy Steve Cohen is. And I'm sure that you have a better idea of it. Like, it's Billy Epler saying, these are the decisions that we should be making. And I feel like he's kind of saying, F it, or do I have that backwards? Is Steve Cohen almost trying to Jerry Jones this thing?
So what I will say is Steve Cohen is very much involved. He's very much involved. And I think that, Billy Epler presents him with everything. That's what we've got in the sense of that he has been told, I want to be afforded the opportunity to know everything that's out there. And then a lot of times, if it makes sense for the bulk of, they're going to say yes to it. Steve Cohen, I think that the Senga signing was more Epler.
Yeah.
And I think that Nimmo was more a Steve Cohen decision.
Yes.
That's what I think. Because for one, Billy Epler, the guy that signed Shohei Ohtani, is very familiar with that market and very familiar with how to get those guys to sign. So that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing I'll say about the Kodai Senga signing is their offseason, they signed Verlander. What do we hear? First thing, they're still in on Senga. They signed Quintana. They're still in on Senga. They signed Nimmo. First thing out from reporters, they're still in on Senga. Epler really wanted this guy, and every move that they made, he was just making the Mets more attractive, What did we hear Senga wanted? Play in a big market.
Win.
To win now and to go to a team that's interested in analytics. Steve Cohen is trying to get the Mets up to par as far as, telling Billy Upper to hire as many analytics people as possible. Check one. Big market. Check two. And now look at the roster we're building here. I think they got him because they gave him the opt-out. So it's, look, come here, win, prove you can be awesome. And in 3 years, you can get your huge contract. And for the Mets perspective, that puts Senga right in their window. 3 years, $15 million a year for Kodai Senga. I was seeing people thinking he was going to get 6 for 120.
Yeah.
And they get him. This is a steal of a contract. You go from long-term money on your rotation. You could have brought back Taijuan Walker at $72 million for 4 years. You pay $3 extra million. You get an additional year on Kodai Senga. It's steal.
It's a steal. And you think about the player options, right? It's 3 for 45. Like, that's so much better than the Taijuan Walker thing. I love the way that Kodai Senga went about his free agency. You mentioned the 3 things that he wanted: big market, to win immediately, team that understands how to improve pitching analytically. That's the liberty that free agency has afforded guys. And yes, guys are going to hunt paydays. Yes, guys are going to hunt winning, but the beauty of Major League Baseball and the beauty of there being 30 teams is you've got a bunch of teams that fall into a whole bunch of different buckets. If you wanted to go to a place that's pretty low key, but really emphasizes winning, Kodai Senga could look at Tampa. Hell, he could look at, Anaheim if they did want to build something. Like, we know that they've turned into a shit show, but you could go to Cleveland, right? Like, there are opportunities there. How about big market in the midst of a rebuild phase? There are a lot of opportunities there. How about small market that, you want to be the guy? Like, there are opportunities there. Biggest payday, obviously, you've got all 30 teams at your disposal. But what Kodai Senga just did is he gave himself the opportunity to sign with the Mets, the Yankees, the Dodgers. Is that it?
Pretty much. Yeah, I think so. I mean, because the Red Sox aren't really on that level right now.
No, I don't think so. And the beauty of baseball and the beauty of what Kodai Senga just did to position himself is he knows that he's going to get some of his better offers from those 3 teams. And it turns out that the Mets were the one that separated themselves from the pack. And I agree with you. I think they did it by a lot of other free agent ads. Kodai Senga, for that reason, has already become a guy that I'm rooting hard for because he knows exactly what the fuck he wanted, and he got exactly what the fuck he wanted. Now, in terms of actual pitching, I think this guy's going to be really good. What do you think? Yeah. I'm sure you've just gone down the rabbit hole of like what he can actually do on the mound.
Well, here's the thing about the Kodai Senga signing to me. Now at 50, if I had to look at it, he has to be a $15 million pitcher. All I need for him to be that is a number 4 starter. And I think that the floor of that is absolutely there. The ceiling, you can dream on him being a guy that can be much better than that. And I think what he's doing here, he's betting on himself, knowing that, look, if I start on a Mets team that's winning every single year here, and I'm in the biggest market, potentially rising to even be an ace if he's thinking himself that highly, I'm going to cash in big time in 3 years. I mean, we don't know. Like, there's no way for me to tell you, oh, yeah, it's definitely going to translate. I'd be talking out of my ass. Like, I really don't know what's going to work here. But what I'll tell you is, even if it doesn't work with the 4-pitch mix and the Mets are, quote unquote, stuck with this contract for 5 years, could we see a Kodai Senga in 2 years be reimagined as a nasty reliever with his fastball and that ghost fork? Like, the potential, all the possibilities are pretty endless with this guy, but the ceiling is there. All off season, it was who's going to be that 3 starter. I always kind of knew they're getting DeGrom, Verlander, or Rodon. That's just the world we're living in with Steve Cohen. They were going to get one of those 3.
They were going to be the 1/2 with Scherzer. So you had the top 2, and you can plug and play the bottom 2.
Exactly. So the question is, who's going to be that game 3 starter? If you end up in a wild card scenario again next year, who's the 3rd guy getting the ball? Now, I love the upside that Kodai Senga brings. And I think what they did by signing Jose Quintana is on 2 fronts. For one, they get a guy that's durable. You know, he's going to go out and be able to make starts for you. He is someone that I think gave them more leverage in the Senga negotiations, where they could say, you know what, this is pricing out for us. We still got a solid 5-man rotation. They could have been fine. Now, also, with all the guys they have in place, they can go with the 6-man rotation if they want to. Really protect Senga, Verlander, and Scherzer. And you get those 3 guys healthy, firing all cylinders in October, that Mets team is going to be tough to beat.
Think you've got 3 badass motherfuckers at the top of this rotation, to be totally honest, which
I think so too.
we know that's what Scherzer is. I think Verlander is cut from a very similar cloth, and I think those two being in the same uniform again after being around the block time and time again is going to be awesome. And you've got Senga, who obviously has his priorities in line. That screams badass MF to me. Jose Quintana is a guy that I have always had a soft spot for because he came onto the scene with the White Sox, right? His lone all-star season was as a White Sox. His best years were as a White Sox until this year. And what I loved about Jose Quintana was, and I know this word is used in different ways now, but just how surgical he was when he was at his best. Because when the White Sox were running out Jose Quintana, they were also running out Chris Sale. And those are 2 left-handed arms as a 1 and 2 in Chicago. They couldn't have thrown in different ways. Chris Sale was 10 strikeout streak, right? He was 97, 98, and this crazy slurve that started in a lefty's ear hole and ended up in the other batter's box, like scraping the dirt. And then you've got Jose Quintana, who was painting 92 at his best when he was in his mid to late 20s. Still doing that. Turns out it's 90. And this was a guy that full-blown sucked before 2022 for a couple of years. But he found out a way to grab that surgical nature about his game again. And I think it worked perfectly. And you've got a guy like Scherzer, who obviously still has disgusting stuff. You've got a guy like Verlander, who can rack up these strikeouts. Senga, we know the report is flirt with 100, nasty split. Having a pitchability guy like Jose Quintana to sprinkle in there and a lefty is kind of awesome. What was the reaction there? Because Quintana came in pretty much at the same time as David Robertson. So those are 2 guys that are cut from a very similar cloth, which is a different cloth than a lot of the stars, the Edwin Diaz and the bullpen, and then the Scherzer, Verlander, Senga, who we didn't know was going to be a Met in the rotation at the time. What was the overall reception to Quintana and Robertson?
Well, first off, I understand the confusion. The Mets have been making a lot of moves. It was Verlander, Quintana, Robertson was sandwiched behind Brandon Nimmo.
But God, yeah. Right.
A lot's been happening. Yeah, they had 2 guys in Quintana and Carrasco that I feel like they can go out there. That they're the type of starters where, they might have a couple of bad outings in there, but more times than not, they're going to be the veterans that are going to eat some innings for you. They're going to get you deep into games. And the one thing I'll say about Quintana is we saw the numbers really tick up when he went to St. Louis. And I think part of that is pitching in front of that defense. Now that Nimmo's back in the fold, this Mets defense can be as good as it was last year. I think that really helps him. Quintana had if it was not the best in baseball, at least in the best in the NL, the best home run per 9 in the game last year. I think it was 0.4. So if he's keeping the ball in the yard, you got Nimmo and Marte running down those fly balls. You got Lindor and McNeil up the middle. I think it's a perfect spot for him. And then you just look at the contract too. 2 years, $26 million for Jose Quintana. There's just no risk in that to me. I mean, it's such a smart move. I tweeted this last night. You have Senga and Quintana making $28 million next year. Taijuan Walker's making 18. Bassett's probably going to make 20. So you saved, it's $10 million less. And personally, Senga, Quintana, which one do you like more? Senga, Quintana, or Bassett, Taijuan Walker?
So I actually had, my answer is the former. My answer is the one that the Mets actually have right now. I had a Bassett question that I totally forgot to ask. You got to feel so much better having Kodai Senga than Chris Bassett at this moment, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Cause, and it's all of it because, I think Bassett was amazing to get you through the season. So I like that they have Quintana to kind of fill that aspect of it. But when it's getting the ball in the postseason, so much better the idea of having Senga with that ghost fork than Chris Bassett, who, when the lineups get better, I just don't know if he can hang and be a playoff starter you can really go to. I think he might give you one good playoff start, but he's not going to be taking the ball every single round and shoving. I think Senga can be that.
Yes, absolutely. I looked at homers per nine. There were 8 qualified pitchers in Major League Baseball that had a home runs per nine clip under 0.7. And I'm going to work, quote unquote, worst to best. So the highest homers per nine, Sandy Alcantara had the eighth best homer per nine, 0.63 home runs per nine innings. So Sandy was 8, Justin Verlander was 7, Carlos Rodon 6, Max Fried 5, Logan Webb, noted ground ball guy, 4. Martin Perez, holy shit, 3. Framber Valdez, best ground ball guy in baseball, 2. And Jose Quintana, 1. Wow. I didn't realize he was that good in that department. That's awesome. That's a great find.
Man. That's the whole, this rotation is just, it's 6 deep because David Peterson, look at his numbers last year. Like the only person on the Mets who's upset right now is David Peterson because he absolutely deserves to be a big league starter. Yeah. And if they go with a 5-man rotation, he might be in Syracuse next year.
Yeah.
He doesn't deserve that, but that's what happens when you're on a good team.
That's what happens when you're on a good team. Robertson, not much time needed on him because he's exactly what they needed. They needed a guy that can throw the 9th inning if Edwin Diaz has worked 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row already. They have a secondary closer and for sure a setup guy. I do want to go to Nimmo now, and that point you made about this being more of a Steve Cohen deal than Senga possibly being a Billy Epler deal, because it's very... I saw Peter Seidler, the owner of the Padres, say something in The Athletic that kind of hit the way that the Nimmo deal with the Mets hit. And he was justifying the long-term deals for superstars coming to San Diego. And Peter Seidler said, I'm more willing to give guys longer-term deals because I feel like that sense of security almost relaxes them a little bit. And I think that's exactly what the Mets just did with Brandon Nimmo. Nimmo knew he was due for a payday, but the question was, is he going to be a place that he may not want to be? There's a lot of anxiety in free agency. And what Steve Cohen, what Billy Epler, what the New York Mets just did to Brandon Nimmo from the outsider perspective is, hey, we love you. We've had you since you were an 18-year-old kid in Wyoming. We want you to be a Met. And here he is as a Met for the next 8 years. And that's got to feel good as a Mets fan.
It feels great, man. I wrote an article for us. It's pretty cool that Brandon Nimmo is a lifelong Met, and I did a podcast on it as well. And, I think that for one, what happened here is if you look at all the contracts the Mets signed this offseason, this is the only one that can be bad. This is the only one where I can envision a scenario, unless, Verlander breaks down. But this is the one where it's an 8-year deal for Brandon Nimmo. I don't think that Billy Epler brought this to Steve Cohen's attention. This is the best way that we can use our resources. But when Steve Cohen is presented with the alternatives in center field, there's nothing in free agency anymore. Bellinger was maybe kind of the only thing that you could maybe put a 1-year bet on, but that's not Nimmo. You go to the trade market. I hear they asked on Alec Thomas. That was going to cost some Brett Beatty.
Yeah.
So if that's going to cost you Brett Beatty, and then you're giving up what could be a cost-controlled third baseman who I think could be better than Alec Thomas as a hitter, what are we doing here? So I think when there was no other options, Steve Cohen stepped in and said, look, let's do it. Let's get Nimmo back. And I think Nimmo, a Scott Boras client, Brandon Nimmo is represented by Scott Boras. He was clear-cut the top outfielder on the market. Yeah. And he signs now. Like, usually you're going to hold that out and get as much money possible. This is Brandon Nimmo saying, I want to be a Met. This is Steve Cohen of the Mets saying, we want Brandon Nimmo. It's so cool. In that article I wrote in the podcast I made on it, there was the catch. He robbed the home run. It was a 2-1 victory over the Dodgers at the end of August. Jacob deGrom on the mound. And after the game, he is talking to the fans, in the ballpark. Watch that clip and try not to have chills about this signing. It is unbelievable. This guy from Wyoming, who was 71 days into being able to have a legal driver's license in his state, signs with the Mets, $2.1 million. Goes from being a 4th outfielder is what everyone thought he was going to be. No one thought he would be a starter. And here he is signing the 2nd largest contract in franchise history. Number 9 might be hanging in the rafters, which I can't even kind of put my head around. But if the Mets win 2 World Series and he's your starting center fielder and he plays 15 years with the Mets, you never know, man.
Yeah, shit, you're right. You never know. And at this juncture, you're saying Brandon Nimmo's number might get retired, and we're just like, dude, shut up now.
I
But
know, I
you're
understand
right.
that, but
When you say that, when he could be the leadoff guy and the center fielder for the New York Mets for several World Series championships, that totally changes the narrative around Brandon Nimmo. And I think he has done a great job already shifting the narrative several times in his career in a positive way. Verlander's the last one we want to go over, and then I want to talk about what's to come for the New York Mets with the managing editor, Ryan Finkelstein. We haven't had you on since Verlander signed that 2-year, $86 million deal. Holy shit. I think that's a great contingency plan when DeGrom walked.
it's funny that he gets exactly the Scherzer contract. It's like this is the going rate. You want the mercenary end of his career, future Hall of Famer that still got it. He gets 43.33 million or whatever the exact breakdown is. This was the Mets plan. They can tell you that it was always that, if DeGrom wanted to come back, he'd come back. I think Verlander was plan A the whole time. I think that they presented Jacob DeGrom with the exact offer that he could refuse. It was 3 years, 115. I made a big point about this on my show. It came in 15 million less than what Scherzer got on that 3-year deal. And then they turn around and they give Verlander 43. Like, come on. There's something to that. Verlander was buddy with Cohen. Cohen wants to be friends with these players. This is, and DeGrom apparently wanted no part of Steve Cohen. Actually had some affection towards the past ownership, which I guess he came up with. So maybe he knows the Wilpons behind closed doors, but Mets fans hear that DeGrom loved the Wilpons. And if they already didn't love DeGrom anymore, that's just going to sail that ship even further. So look, you go from 5 years committed to Jacob DeGrom with a 6-year option. The Mets were never going to match that contract. You get Verlander, it's a 2-year window. He lines right in with Scherzer now. And you go out and you try to win. And again, all of this is aimed towards trying. Steve Cohen does not really want to continue to pay a ridiculous fine. He's still a guy that wants to run his businesses in a way where they make money. But he was inherited a car. It's like he was inherited like a Honda Civic, and he's waiting for the Lamborghini to be able to actually come in. And so he's just renting one for a couple of years now. And then he's going to get, or maybe it's a Tesla in 2 years. That's more self-sufficient. I don't know. But
so you ever watched Song Exploder on Netflix?
No.
So Song Exploder, I love Song Exploder. So the whole premise is this guy sits down with an artist and walks through how they created a song.
Okay.
And it's, like, hey, why did you opt for this bass line? Like, how did you make that sound? What is the meaning behind this song? And they explode LA by Ty Dolla $ign, which is the lead song on his debut album. And Ty Dolla $ign, he wanted violin in the song and said, no, fuck it, I need a whole orchestra. And he said, yeah, I paid $75,000 of money that I didn't have to get an orchestra into a recording booth and make this sound because I knew I would have it later. And like, that is what's going on with Steve Cohen, right? Like, he's putting in so much money up front because he knows he can build this dynasty. And he knows he'll get this money back. He'll get it in foam trumpets that they sell at Citi Field. He'll get it in Verlander jerseys. Like, he's going to be just fine, I promise you. So this is a guy that has the means, putting in a shit ton of means up front in order to roll in the dough over the next however many decades that the Cohens own the New York Mets. So Ryan Finkelstein, I ask you, what is left on the docket for the New York Mets this offseason?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, building on that for a second here, since Steve Cohen came under, there's only one significant prospect that's been traded. Pete Crow Armstrong was traded to get Javi Baez when the Mets thought that they were a piece away, and it was his number one player, Francisco Lindor, that was in his ear trying to get the guy. Other than that, they have not touched the farm. That is the goal here. That's why they are signing all these guys. It's to let this farm system develop. And I think leading into your next question here, they really do believe in Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty being big parts of this team. By bringing Nimmo back, the offense is the same as last year. Mets fans freak out about that. It was a top 5 offense in baseball. Top 4 if you go based on WAR, top 5 on runs scored. So I think that the idea is we're going to get some extra juice. with Alvarez catching a lot of juice compared to the offensive catchers they had, and Beatty at third base. That pushes Escobar into a bench role where he can contribute at DH. I think what's left here is they need a fourth outfielder.
Yeah.
A name I would think about here is Adam Duvall. Is that the same name you guys are talking about?
No. I've got
What
one.
do you think
It made Aram laugh, and I feel like it might piss you off.
All right, hold on. So here's my Duvall take. Fourth outfielder, gives you some pop, right-handed. Think he makes a lot of sense. AJ Pollock would kind of be another version of that. I think if they really want to juice the offense, they could consider abandoning Vogelback, going somewhere else like a Canna or Brantley at DH. I could see that happening. But other than that, I mean, it's add probably one more arm to the bullpen, and then it's about trading guys. So maybe we can talk about that after, because I think that they're going to try to get rid of some of these other players that are on the roster that are on salaries that they might not want, like a McCann and others. But we'll get to that in a minute. Who's this name? I'm very curious who this name is.
What do you think the fit's like with Joey Gallo?
Dude, I actually had that too.
Yes.
I have discussed Joey Gallo on my show. This was before Nimmo came back, and I was looking at how do you fill right field if you slide Marte into center, and I thought that Joey Gallo made sense with the defense, with the power. I don't know if he's going to want to sign there at this point because there might not be enough at bats for him, but it's intriguing.
Okay,
little
good.
Joey Gallo.
I just didn't want to get shut down because I think what has gone under the radar is outfield defense. He's a really good defensive outfielder, and we know the pop that is there. And Aram cited slug. They need more slug. Joey Gallo, we know, is slug. That's all he does is slug and defense in the outfield. So I did like the Joey Gallo idea, but keep going.
Well, so here's the thing. I think with all these guys I was discussing, under the context of the Mets are probably going to lose Nimmo. So now when you're talking about them as a fourth outfielder, suddenly an Adam Duvall, a Joey Gallo, a Michael Conforto all make a lot more sense. And to me, Conforto is the one, of course, as the Mets fan that I want. And the reason being, if you know, you obviously are much better terms with Scott Boras. If you have an honest conversation, say, look, Michael Conforto, come to the Mets on a 1 year with an option on a second year. And you come into spring training, and can you beat out Mark Canha to be the starting left fielder for the New York Mets? I think he probably can, or at least all these guys will get time. And then suddenly Canha's your fourth outfielder. I think Conforto makes a ton of sense for this team right now because he gives you the pop that you would want. He could play all three positions if you had to, but can definitely play both corners well. Obviously, familiar with New York. And if you're Michael Conforto and you're looking at your options, you have a chance to go to the Mets for a year. Let's just say it's a 1 year, $10 million contract with like a $20 million option as a $5 million buyout on it. So he's getting like 1 for 15 guaranteed.
Yeah.
That's a contract. If you're Michael Conforto, I think he'd consider you want to go play for the Mets again, redeem yourself and play for a team that's going to be awesome this year. It might be a little more attractive than we think.
I think so. The problem is just like the possibility of backfiring is way higher with the Mets than with others because he could get phased out of at bats really, really quickly. Yeah. You know what I mean?
That's the thing. That's the thing. Obviously, you go to Cincinnati or you go to play for the Cubs and you should have 500 plate appearances slated for you, probably guaranteed for you.
Yeah,
I mean, that's where the difference is.
The wind blowing out, like 35 pumps at Great American Ballpark.
It's not the best thing for him, but it's the best thing for me. So,
yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Nothing pitching, right? I thought the pitching was picture perfect, to be totally honest.
I think that, what's crazy is their 40-man actually is set now after the Senga signing. They are full. So they would have to trade some guys to open up some spots. I could still see them bringing back Adam Ottavino or Trevor May. I think Trevor May is actually the guy I would sign because I kind of like the reliever coming off the down year that showed that he's better than that.
Yeah.
And Trevor May was good in September. So if you get him back on a contract that's going to be a lot cheaper than Ottavino, slide him back and see what happens. But their bullpen, now that they traded for Brooks Raley also, their bullpen's kind of fine. I think the only thing is, can they find a suitor for James McCann? That's something that they're going to try to do. You never know. You never know.
He might just be a sunk
it.
cost.
Here's how you can get rid of James McCann. You trade James McCann with Mark Vientos.
Oh,
that's one way.
Yeah.
Another way, you trade James McCann with Tyler McGill.
Yeah.
Another way, you eat a good amount of the money. I gotta, maybe we can end on this one because I have a fun trade I wanted to pitch to you. Maybe you can tell me who comes back because I don't even think it really matters who comes back to the Mets. Call up Baltimore. Send them a year of Carlos Carrasco, and you eat I had $4 million on McCann's contract for each of the next 2 years. So they get a backup for Rutschman for 2 years that put him at, I think, $8 million a season.
Yeah.
The Mets get money off their books, and they get a Carlos Carrasco in their rotation, and the Mets roll with Peterson as their 5.
Are you saying what do they get back?
I don't even think that it doesn't even matter what they get back. They get McCann off their books, is what they're getting.
I was going to say they might get like a piece of the now extinct short porch in left field. Like, I don't think you get a player back, but.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just saying, would the Orioles do that? Would the Orioles consider that? Because if you think about it from Cohen's perspective, if you're cutting $22 million on a luxury tax penalized team, he could be saving like, what is that? Like $40 million by getting rid of those 2 players.
Yeah. And this is a team that needs veteran leadership really badly now that Mancini's gone. Like, who's your veteran leader? Cedric Mullins? He hasn't won anything in his career. So you've got a guy in McCann that has caught a no-hitter, been told time and time again, and like the whole narrative around James McCann is he is as good of an on-field coach as you could possibly find. He just isn't really that talented. That sounds like a backup catcher. That seems like a guy on a major league roster. And then Carlos Carrasco, he's been around the block. Like, I do think that makes a lot of sense. I like that pairing, Fink. Good shit.
Yeah, just saying. I mean, the only thing that I would say about that one is there is a very real chance the Mets are thinking the 6-man rotation, in which case they're going to hang on to Carrasco. But yeah, I'm just trying to find ways to get McCann off the books, and that was one that I thought was pretty fun.
Yeah, no, that is pretty fun. Last thoughts on your New York Mets? I mean, shit, like it's nothing but positive vibes, right?
I'm chilling, and it's the off season. Nothing can ruin it. You know what I mean?
Nothing
I will be happy and giddy for the next 3 months until baseball starts to get played, and hopefully the Mets will keep winning. I'll stay this way for like a year. That'd be great. But yeah, I love the off season, especially now, and we'll see if Steve Cohen has anything else up his sleeve. I don't think he really has to though. This team's kind of done.
I love it. Shout out the New York Mets. Mets fans finally have something to be super giddy about. And it feels like if any team has come close to acing the offseason, they're the ones. Every link you need is in the episode description. Peter and I will be back with another GM episode tomorrow. We are still deciding which team that is going to be, but this was kind of your GM episode for the New York Mets. Really, it's just a love fest for Stevie C and the boys. Fink, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, for sure.